You're watching the first day of Season 2 of Hearthstone Grandmasters here for 2020. This is the APAC region, our first region of the day, to be followed by Europe and then Americas. A full day here on Friday, full of Hearthstone action. But before we get into the later regions, we got to find out who is going through to the semi-finals to play out to be the Week 1 winner on Sunday. And in that winner's bracket, Gia, we are now looking at che0nsu and Glory, two players who I think can boast very, very strong claims at the moment to being right up at the top. Glory, obviously, primarily due to his qualification through to the World Championships later on this year after being Season 1 champion. But che0nsu, on his own right, as I've been saying time and time again, boring everyone, I'm sure, he has just been putting in the work recently, and my God, is it showing.
Sorry about that. I was muted. For che0nsu, I think we can absolutely say that he's the most accomplished GM in APAC as a recent ladder play. But now is his chance to really prove that he has what it takes to translate that into wins in Conquest or even in other formats later on. And what better way to do that than versus Glory, the man who absolutely killed it throughout every phase of last season.
That's right. And I think even though Glory has done an incredible job so far, with the specifics of how the matchups work here from archetype to archetype up against che0nsu, I think he might be in a little bit of trouble because he's clearly going for an aggro strategy that wants to ban away the control anti-aggro decks, which appears to be primarily Warrior. He's banned it away from Flurry, and now he's done the same up against che0nsu. But now he has to reckon against not only the Highlander Priest, which in my experience can be pretty good in the early game at fighting back against all the aggro decks, but also this Control Demon Hunter, which has an incredible amount of not only board clears at all stages in the game, but arguably more importantly, life gain.
Right. If I have to take that to how this meta for the first week has shaped up, at least for Conquest, it seems like most players have landed on bring Druid, bring Priest, and then bring two more decks. And in the case of Glory, the two more decks he brought, the Mage and Rogue, are very aggressively oriented. And for che0nsu, the two other decks, the Demon Hunter and Warrior, are very control oriented. And I think particularly can prey on that Rogue. So I have to agree that Glory is not in a very great spot. However, he does manage to line that Rogue first up against the Highlander Priest, which is a matchup that he ended up taking last series.
He was looking pretty close in that series, and I will say that a lot of che0nsu's hand, a lot of Flurry's hand on the Priest in that matchup was not really getting the job done. Here for che0nsu, though, it's already looking decent. You know, we got the Zephrys, the payoff for going for the Highlander version is already available.
Yes, indeed. And for Glory, he starts off with a pretty good curve, gets the Worgen and the Sneaky Delinquent, and of course the ever so crucial Secret Passage to essentially give him 5 more free draws later on, or even the second one. However, not something he wants to see this early.
Yeah, the weird thing for me looking at the list for che0nsu as well is I was going to say, oh, it's a bit of a shame that he didn't get Disciple of Galakron for a 1-drop. He's not even playing it. There are no 1-cost minions in his deck at all, which seems very surprising to me as an omission from a Galakron to Priest deck. Obviously, it's not going very all-in on the Galakron effect with none of the Invoke cards available, but I just see it as like a pretty good 1-drop to throw into the deck. But clearly, che0nsu disagrees, going with a slightly more mid-game strategy.
He is just going to go for the Zephrys immediately to get 4th Lightning there. I have to say I wasn't 100% sure it would give that. I was thinking Arcane Missiles, but that is a guaranteed clear. And the cost of the Overload is going to be a little bit painful, though, because he has either Apotheosis or cards that he would have been able to curve into.
It hurts, for sure, but I think just getting ahead on the board is pretty impactful, it's got to be said. As you know, if he was going to go for Kaj next turn, like if he picked Backstab, gone Backstab, and then Kaj comes down, it's actually arguable the other line was superior there, I think.
Yeah, it's not so much that I'm criticizing che0nsu's play. I'm criticizing that Zephrys didn't give Arcane Missile.
Oh, right,
but
okay.
Never mind, that's not something that I can really do because we need to know how Zephrys works by this point. But again, with the new expansions and new archetypes coming out, it's just even more different situations to figure out how Zephrys works. So even though nothing gets added to the pool of Zephrys, you still have to raise your skill ceiling on that card.
You do indeed. Something to always stay on top of, which I'm sure che0nsu has a lot of experience with. Again, this is one of the things that comes not from having good Hearthstone fundamentals and being just kind of naturally good at the game, or you played it a lot back in the day. It's from playing a lot right now. You need to be constantly making sure that you are keeping up with all the different changes that Zephyrus can offer you.
Indeed. So are you going to rip the first passage here, get something hopefully a bit more proactive than the removal spells that his previous hand had. Hits the sap as well, which is huge because that card, after it being popped, would have summoned a stealth minion, which is why che0nsu didn't copy the higher statted minion there.
Yeah, pretty nicely done. I think that by che0nsu. And Glory in response, I like getting it out of the way, making sure there's no minions available to cast Apotheosis on whatsoever. And basically just throwing his hands together and saying, please, oh please, do not have Holy Nova to be able to blast away this board.
Or Breath of the Infinite, but they're both not there at the moment. che0nsu, best he can do is just, Thought Steal something? Could potentially pick up a backstab from it, but he's prioritizing healing because yeah, it was just 2 damage off lethal there had he not. But wow, that was very, very fast. Burrowing Scorpion can go face!
Whoa. Nicely spotted there by Glory.
Lethal.
And
wait. He didn't give it stealth. Misplay. If you kill your target, it gains stealth.
Yes, Gia. Strict misplay there. Just like how he didn't give his Beetle at the end of the last game +4/+4 with the survival of the fittest with the Druid. Terrible play from Glory. Obviously, I am being facetious here. I think playing very, very well overall and demonstrating here, Gia, something that I wasn't necessarily expecting, which is both times that we've seen Rogue versus the Highlander Priest. Both games Zephyrus available on curve at the start of the game, and both times the Priest has lost.
Yeah, it's pretty surprising, I have to say. But I guess the usage of Zephyrus on turn 2 is much, much less than it could be later on. But if you don't play it on turn 2, then those stealth minions could compound more and more. I think what we were seeing as a big problem is the lack of AoE there over from che0nsu's perspective. For Glory, though, I have to say, that was lightning fast. And even though this rogue deck seems kind of scummy, I'm pretty happy to see that this is the first time this type of archetype from Rogue, which is really, really light and just heavily damage-oriented, is coming to fruition. It seems like that's, if you're going to play an RPG, for example, a Rogue is not meant to go for lots of spells combos, but that's what Rogue was previously.
Yeah, exactly. It's a much more stripped, lean version of the deck, as opposed to the Galakrond Rogues of old, which, to be fair, is still an archetype you can play. Galakrond Rogue exists, and it is viable, I would say, being able to cheat out all those expensive minions for a lot cheaper. But I fully agree with you. I am all in on the aggro Rogue train at the moment, no matter what version of the deck you're going for, as it can just get under the bottom of these priest decks that don't have time to do their broken combos later on in the game.
Speaking of broken combos, though, Glory has now played his Druid with the Overgrowth Guardian Animals online, and he is running 5 Beasts, so the 1 Twilight Runner in hand is probably not going to be too detrimental compared to with Flurry a while ago.
And yeah, the classic combo there of Overgrowth plus cards being a winning combination in most Druid archetypes, it's got to be said at this point.
Yeah, whether it be Mount Seller, Guardian Animals, or even more ramp to get your early Ysera down, Overgrowth has really become the crux of modern Druids. The question, though, as to whether he wants to Bog Beam away this Zephyrus, I don't think it's very, very threatening at this point. There's the thought of Apotheosis coming down and making it a bit more annoying, but if you're going to be getting out rushed minions in 2 turns time anyway, then it seems that the removal would be a bit superficial. He is actually just gonna double ramp out the Overgrowth this turn though, which lets him play Twilight Runner next turn.
Yeah, I mean, the curve works out, right? You can go Twilight Runner, Vate Guardians, very, very smoothly working out. And it really relies now on che0nsu to start doing his own disgusting combos. Priest has a whole lot of them, make no mistake. This is not the kind of purely reactive class that we've come to expect from Priest along the way. It has a lot of tempo swings that it can do to pull things into its advantage.
the new big disgusting combo, I have to say, is Wave of Afi plus Cabal Acolyte, which we can see the second half of that combo is in hand for che0nsu. To the point that even in pure Galakron Priest, they're still running those cards, even though you might think at first glance they fit in better in Highlander. che0nsu, though, pickup of the Lightning Bloom for himself could make a huge difference in an early Plague of Death later on, where che0nsu Glory might not necessarily expect it.
Yeah, that's a good point. It's also available if he wants to, for just like getting down an overflow next turn. This deck functions well when you have all the different pieces working together very, very strong, very powerfully.
I'm surprised we didn't see a Karj there just for Temple. In terms of cards that he would hope to copy from Glory side, I guess che0nsu would be the biggest one to get down. But it seems greedy to me.
I mean, I think if you're expecting Guardians next turn, which is pretty reasonable, although I guess not necessarily for sure. It's just very easily dealt with a Thresher or a rushing Twilight Runner as well to be able to deal with it very, very cleanly.
Yeah, good point. Thresher essentially negates the fact that you played a second minion. But the top deck of Shadow Word Ruin is huge to remove at least the card drawing minions from Glory.
Okay, that's a combo. Runic Carvings plus Soul of the Forest is technically a way to just stick a bit of a board.
I'm looking at Germination, though.
For what purpose? What? Just big
Immediately play a minion. Well, I guess Runic Carvings could be a board right now, but the fact that he can't play Soul immediately on the same turn. However, the fact that he's only going into turn 7, and if you get a lot of smaller minions alongside these, it makes Galakron, for example, a lot worse from che0nsu. I think it's fine to even play it without the Soul of the Forest. Or at least without the guarantee of hitting the forest on it.
Yeah, I mean, obviously you're going into turn 7, which is Soul Mirror, is the big thing to play around there, which especially when there is the Lake Thresher as well, which does get the cleave effect when it attacks off of Soul Mirror, your board would be pretty cleanly wiped up there, I think it's easy to say.
In the end here, Glory, with just the 2 threats, is happy with the amount of damage he's pushing towards che0nsu.
The Elucia as well is pretty ludicrous, as it always seems to be here. Whether or not che0nsu would know it, he could basically just use up all of his opponent's hand.
Like, he has to be, I guess, pretty confident of what is in the opponent's hand for the time that he plays it, because from che0nsu's perspective, this could just be survival of the fittest. They did just ramp into 10, and then it's not something you can eventually, or immediately use Elucia to get rid of.
Well, it's worth considering on this turn that it could be just a che0nsu Runic Carvings all-in turn here to be able to go as all-in as possible.
I think it's fine here from Glory. This is still setting up tons of damage. And if all of it sticks, he's got a good shot of 2-turn lethal. For che0nsu, though, Lightning Bloom with the Plague of Death is available as early as now. However, it means that if there's a follow-up, he doesn't have a good response.
Yeah, this is just the baseline play. You know, there's other stuff that you can start messing around with like Cabal Acolyte, Lightning Bloom, and then maybe Elucia as well, just to try and steal a couple of the important cards from your opponent. But your opponent is clearly running out of stuff here. They managed to scrounge together a board based on Nature Studies cards, but that is not winning the game in its own right, especially if you can easily clear.
I mean, I just don't see the Elucia getting played because che0nsu had Overflow and Galakron at that point, which are cards that he would not want to give Glory at that point. And he just didn't have a strong read on what Glory's hand could be. So I think it's totally fine for che0nsu here to just maintain even more value. And this Galakron can make quick work of the Teacher's Pet.
Oh, I mean, there's so many ways to go about it, right? You could try and, like, resurrect the Zephyrus in order to get that to be able to answer it. There's the Brittlebone Destroyer.
Yeah, that's probably the best method. It allows him to develop minions alongside.
Yeah, as long as he's just not being too greedy with his cards, tempoing out his hand, I think che0nsu should be absolutely fine here. You know, for Glory, it's basically Ysera or bust we're already looking at.
And if he had hit the other overflow, it could have given Glory some chance at coming back in the game. But this che0nsu just does not have any payoff cards alongside it. It looks to me to be a complete pass this turn. Oh my gosh.
Not worth just going for Bog Beam, you think, to buy you extra turns potentially?
I guess it's the fact that there's 2 pairs of cheap spells here, and then if you leave yourself with 3, it makes it a bit more awkward. But if you're thinking about payoff cards anyway, the only one that lets you go for 2 cycles of che0nsu in a turn is Overflow. And if you go Overflow, then you probably pick up another cheap spell. So he's actually just going to use 2 Bog Beams. Leaves 2 spells to maybe cheat out Survival. Oh, she's going to play che0nsu, alright.
Yeah, I mean, it's a 7 mana 8/11. It's very, very powerful, and he just has to pray by some miracle here that it's good enough to stick on the board. But even before the time rip was there, I would be staggered if there wasn't an answer found. I mean, it was just the Galakrond on its own.
Yeah, time rip can be played alongside the Cobalt Spellkin. I mean, if I'm che0nsu here, well, you mentioned it a while ago, it's just very clear that he just needs to not get greedy. He also cannot afford to just play down the Alex Straza immediately, because he's not in a rush to kill Glory. So as long as he just removes threat by threat, he's in a great spot.
Yes, indeed. He knows, of course, as well that there are no burst spells whatsoever. And with the nature studies having gone as well, there's not even any way that you can generate it, and the 5 armor locks that out anyway. It's just nothing happening at all for Glory. Overflow is his last vestige of hope here to try and wrestle back the game.
He hits the Ysera. Okay, there it is. That's Glory's best hope at putting together lethal damage.
So, does he have to save the Ghidra so that it's big enough to take out the che0nsu inside the Kaj in one hit?
I guess it's tough to expect the priest to get immediate value off of che0nsu because they need to have 2 cheap spells into a big spell, but the fact that he can pair it with a bigger spell to buff the Ghidra next turn, I think warrants holding it.
Wax a Dread? Yeah, we'll take that.
Sure. che0nsu putting together lethal damage given that he has Zephyrus in hand. And Glory's best response is just to go for Ysera and taunt it up. But that is still just going to be GG because there's a time rip there. There is, what is this? 21 showing on board, and then Zephyrus can give Lava Burst for lethal.
Yeah, multiple ways to go about this for che0nsu. This is the power of Priest Gia that we have been waiting to see. It's also, to be fair, the power of a Druid draw that kind of just runs out. It just didn't get enough stuff to do, even with the Guardian Animals and getting the Twilight Runners to draw a whole bunch. Not enough to be able to take the win. And so in the end, well-deserved here by che0nsu, and I think clearly showing that Priest just doesn't really run out of stuff. Even if it can die in the early game, it can just keep going and going and going, and it is brutal to have to go up again.
Honestly, on Twitter, there has been very, very active discussion as to whether there even is a consistent counter to Priest these days. I've heard the most common responses would be the more combo-oriented decks, be it Questlock or Malagos Druid, but even those can sometimes get foiled by one well-timed Elucia. So I wonder if the best way to go about Priest is something more towards what Glory's Rogue was built to do, which is just go all in the early game, not give them time to generate value. And I think that the coming weeks will really, really show the skills of the best deck builders in GM.
Yeah, it sounds like it's pretty on the money to me. And with that out of the way, of course, we are looking at che0nsu having equalized now, 1 game apiece with the Priest out of the way and the Rogue out of the way. The tough decks, I think, for either player is likely to be based on what we've seen, the Mage from Glory. Even though I am still a huge fan of the deck, I think it's very powerful. I think it's very fun as well. Not that that matters all too much for these players in Grandmasters. But it's clearly been struggling so far. Something in the equation has been missing.
Yeah, I think particularly against the Demon Hunter, it could struggle quite a bit, given that the Demon Hunter runs so much healing. And the fact that only a couple of the spells can actually freeze the face, as opposed to minions, means that Demon Hunter can sometimes even race the mage by just shoving a lot of weapon damage towards them, and the mage themselves won't be running any healing. We are going to start off with Demon Hunter versus Druid, though, and that's a pretty good curve for che0nsu to begin with. However, this is not a deck that really curves out with minions. He wants to be saving those Shard Shatter Mystics for board clears, and just trying to unlock the skull from either side is pretty awkward here for che0nsu.
Pretty clever line as well from Glory, actually. One that I think, very possibly overlook most of the time, which is when you have Nature Studies and Wild Growth, it's a perfect curve to go Nature Studies on 1 and then Wild Growth on 2 to take you back to the good old days of Druid. But here, Glory is considering, well, he's going for the line of Wild Growth to ramp him up to 5, and then Nature Studies on 5 to play Guardian Animals a full turn earlier. It's very, very smart.
I think that makes a ton of sense here. che0nsu is not going to be wasting any time with this Magtheridon, though, because he knows it is going to be active next turn. Shard Shatter Mystic can deal 3 to all of these. 2 Soul Fragments in the deck, so even if one is top deck, he can have that guarantee.
And look at the effect that it has here. Glory had the ability to go Lightning Bloom into the Guardian Animals here to just lock down the board, probably draw a whole bunch of cards as well. But he's scared, and rightly so. It would just get obliterated.
I mean, the Magtheridon off the top for che0nsu was so enormous here. It allows him to go for an aggressive game plan, which is one of these situations where Druid is not actually even comfortable dealing with. This is nuts! It's just a 12-12.
It is just a 12-12. It's a very deliberate choice for him to go for it this turn, instead of going for just Marrow Slicer, say, as an alternate play to keep going face. Because it means that Glory can potentially find an answer here with his own Guardian Animals.
It would... I don't think there's an answer with the mana available unless you're barring a crazy Kel'Thas turn, which would...
That's true. That's
have
true.
to have a very, very specific combination of cards.
I suppose I should say the main point is that then the Magtheridon effect isn't destroying any beasts, right? It's basically just summoning a 12-12. The destroy all minions effect was pretty insignificant, to be honest. I'm not saying it's wrong at all. It's just, I think, a very interesting discussion point.
It's true. I definitely was defaulting on just the 12-12 as a threat here for che0nsu, but we're starting to see the problem, and you brought up pretty succinctly that these threats have taunt, so it's just like che0nsu has to get rid of them anyway, and the fact that he already used one of the Shard Shatters makes it to be Blade Dance to get through the rest of these pretty efficiently.
Demons.
Which, nowhere to be found at the moment for che0nsu, having to rely on the slightly less impressive clears here to get the job done.
You can use these double Soul Shears to potentially get rid of the 3-drop piece.
Yeah, I like doing it this way around just in case it was Emperor Cobra or anything that had to be cleared off. And he goes with this line anyway.
And Glory managed to stave off that first round of threats. He can get other Guardian Animals down. And Moonfire means he'll only have to trade 1 minion into this 12-5, or even without Moonfire if he gets Twilight Runner.
Yeah, which I think is pretty much guaranteed to be getting at least one of at this point.
Absolutely insane now.
No second payoff spell to go with Kel'Thas on this turn, which is a little bit scary because there are multiple ways that che0nsu could find an answer for this here. Thankfully for Glory, though, none of those have been realized by che0nsu here. This is starting to look scary.
Definitely, the Mage Hunters would have come in clutch here potentially for che0nsu, but I think Skull is definitely still in the upper 10% of cards you can hope to play this turn, because he's not likely to die from 21, and he could just put together something better to do next turn.
And he's got the time to do that because there is basically nothing happening whatsoever on Glory's turn here. Beefing up the health a little bit, which, okay, not insignificant, but not what he wants to be doing. Last chance now for che0nsu to find a clear on this board.
Or healing. He could just use this Eldrazi Warblades. He has Twists, Chaos Strike, and Kane to be able to push face if he wants.
True.
Would still end up leaving Kael'thas on board, which is scary, but I think he has the read now that Glory, at least as of last turn, did not have a big payoff spell to pair with this.
So he can gain 12 attack on this turn, right? And spend all of his mana, which means that, I mean, I said it was a fairly inconsequential turn from Glory last turn, just going for the Iron Bark. Turns out it's a pretty big difference here.
I think it's 10. I don't think he'll be able to afford the second. Yeah, it's 1 mana short to be able to get the other second slice. But still, it's huge because if che0nsu can just survive another turn, then if he draws into Mage Hunter or something to remove these threats, not even remove, actually. I don't know. It still has to be something pretty miraculous after this turn to really turn it around for che0nsu.
Yeah, this is the way to clear it up. Go for the che0nsu here at the end. I mean, missed 1 health, of course, by missing the hero power.
Oh my gosh, that top deck for Glory. che0nsu has no time to breathe. And he can get down the Twilight Runner this turn. I don't see a better use of Lightning Bloom now that the Kael'thas has been removed.
Yeah, absolutely. Even if we were to see the Survival of the Fittest come off the top, it can still be Lightning Bloomed out to deliver, if not lethal, very close to it on the following turn.
The Blade Dance for che0nsu. So clutch here.
It is. Clears the board.
Yeah.
Health
a little bit more
effectively
breathing room.
Regained for all intents and purposes. This is nowhere near lethal now for Glory due to the lack of any burst spells. So now, what's the game plan? How does this turn around?
It's just kind of become this strange impasse where Glory is hoping to draw his Ysera very soon. And che0nsu, he has all of these weapon charges, but it takes so much time for all of that to be able to go face. That draw, though, changes everything. Remember Alana from like 20 metas ago?
Yeah, I mean, not quite the same caliber, but close enough to be getting the job done here, I think. Glory definitely put on the ropes here and has to find some way to answer back against this board. Speaker Ghidra, great way to do so, even with the Bulk Beam. Definitely not dead quite yet. But che0nsu, from being so far on the back foot, has turned this around admirably.
The Militia off the top was so far above every other card that he could have drawn in terms of quality. Absolutely huge now. Lapidary can deal 5 damage.
5, 9, 10. It's like 19 damage he can do on this turn. It's getting real close to just closing out the game.
But he does have to deal with that Ghidra because it's threatening 18. Yeah. He could use the Lapidary with Eldrazi to get lifesteal and extra healing off of that. It's just a bit awkward though because he'd be sinking most of the damage into the Ghidra, but if he trades minions, then he'll have to lose 2 of them.
I mean, honestly, I think I'd rather sink 2 minions in than a weapon hit at this point. When it's 10 damage, that's your win condition, I feel like.
I have to agree. And also the fact that if he is sinking minions in, then he's at 20. No risk of dying from that side. So by that logic, you go for Marrow Slicer instead of Eldrazi Warblades. Fit in 4 extra damage across 2 turns.
Good thing he cleared up the Ghidra, lest it be dealing a full 30 damage in 1 turn there.
Man, Glory's Ysera was so far at the bottom. He's going fatigue himself with this draw, but he just wanted to guarantee that Ysera would be playable next turn. I don't think he'll have the time though.
It's going to be razor thin whether or not he gets it. Nature Studies, if it can get Iron Bark here, could be a big defensive measure.
It's a Glowfly deck again.
Yikes, that was awful. Okay.
The taunt is very clutch for him though. che0nsu, can he pick up the Mage Hunter here?
Oh, you're a prophet. Oh.
Not quite lethal yet, but just being able to nullify that taunt, sink the 10 damage face, re-equip a weapon.
It means that all of a sudden, Ysera just coming down is not good enough, right? You're just going to be dying if you go for that.
Pretty much irrelevant, especially since che0nsu's also playing the Shard Shatter. The damage lines up perfectly to clear off that Anubis Hath as well. Glory gonna take 2 fatigue damage off the next draw. And then he'll have Crystal Power to go back up to 5, but it is just not enough.
It's what we're seeing from these Druid decks, isn't it? It's easy to be lulled into the idea that with these Druids, they just have kind of infinite stuff, because when they go for Guardian Animals and then they buff it up with Survival of the Fittest, there's no way to survive it. But these control decks from che0nsu are quite consistently showing that they can outlast the Druid decks. They do it in a different way. The Bomb Warrior obviously functions a little bit differently to the hyper high damage Demon Hunter in terms of a control deck. But the same core idea is there, that you can outlast most of their threats and then deliver your own win condition to lock them out.
I mean, that game went so interestingly at 2 main points, I have to say. The first one was the use of Magtheridon, not really for clearing purposes, but for board presence, which kind of became preemptive clearing, because as we saw, it didn't actually get to push much face damage, if at all. And then it ended up just taking trades from the Druid side to be cleared. And what happened later on, actually, was that che0nsu, I think, was very likely to just run a bit dry there had he not top-decked his second skull or exactly the militia. So I'm still unsure to say that it can consistently outlast Druid, but I will say that with what che0nsu was given, he made absolutely the best use out of it.
Yeah, I think that for che0nsu, one thing that we can definitely say is that he knows these decks very well. These are not the kind of decks that you just see on HS Replay and think, oh, brilliant, I'll give that a go and see if I can pilot it well. You've got to know the win conditions. You've got to know how to play them in all the different matchups. And so far, che0nsu, 1 game away from going through to the semifinals on Sunday, has been showing that high level of knowledge.
And for Glory, I don't know if we've even seen this mage take more than 1 win so far. It's going to be a bit difficult, but this is the type of curve, similar to what Glory had before, that looks like it could just play the Apprentice on curve.
Again,
or even
Glory.
before curve.
This is so interesting to see. I absolutely love the different ways that different players pilot these archetypes. This is so different from how I would approach playing this matchup, which, I mean, I wasn't going to say that means it's wrong. Probably that means it's right, to be perfectly honest. But here, it is not going to work out well for Glory, who is met with a very swift Crystal Power.
It just reminds me so much of the old Cyclone Mage from before, where Sorcerer's Apprentice on curve was almost a mortal sin, except in particularly the Mirror, where you could hardly expect your opponent to clear it if they don't run that many removal spells. I still don't know whether or not it's the same philosophy, especially since this Druid does run removal, but one thing's for sure, Glory has made up his mind on it, and as early as now, I feel like there's a lot to be learned.
Couldn't agree more. I mean, it could very possibly have worked out differently for him had he gone for the Arcane Intellect line, draw a whole bunch of cards, then go with the Sorcerer's Apprentice. Quite clearly, though, it's not working out great for him. With a Fist Bomb from che0nsu, Speaker Ghidra gets a +4/+4 buff. You don't often see it, but when you do, it's disgusting.
Pretty huge, but Glory has a great with the Firebrand. This card is just so powerful. 3 mana 3/4s in Hearthstone have gone from Spider Tank to Talon Priest to this now.
Yeah, it's pretty ludicrous. Whoa!
Okay. Alright,
This is just
che0nsu.
both players doing the best thing it's almost possible to do. I guess Guardian Animals would have been a little bit better, but still, very, very powerful there for che0nsu. And there's just too much to talk about here from both sides. So good, so cool to see.
I will say, though, that for Druid, when the best thing they can do is fill up their hand a lot more, Rage, best thing they can do with this few cards is probably just play another minion on curve.
Right.
It's looking really tough for Glory. But, oh, second Apprentice
Wow.
can change this story pretty drastically.
Yeah, and even though Glory has been a big proponent of tempoing out your cards instead of saving them up for the big turns, now the missing ingredient is going to be becoming clear for us, Gia. With an insane mage turn available.
But che0nsu picks up his guardian animals. There has been a Twilight Runner played, so I think he should get Thresher, and that's it, because he's only running 4.
Mm-hmm.
And so...
Wait, has
still
the Thresher been played?
There hasn't. Right? Oh, that's my bad.
It was just the Speaker Ghidra.
Mm-hmm. And so, this is just going to be even more card draw for che0nsu. Threats are not stopping anytime soon, but top-off turn for Glory is very real next turn. If he can pick up a Mana Giant to top off the turn with, then Glory could be looking at a very winning position.
Yeah, I really like the attack with the Twilight Runner as well for che0nsu. One of the things you really have to be afraid of against Mage is Devolving Missiles. If you don't attack with it now, you are not getting the cards in the very likely outcome. So getting that done and then just playing whatever else you get off the top is the way to go, in my opinion.
Interesting choice to take the Ancients there. Is looking at Might. Just to give him a way to remove a minion should his board get frozen. But he's going all in right now. The Kael'thas is not in hand. So che0nsu's saying, let me just go all in on this board. I just completely forgot he runs Living Dragon Breath and it's in hand. So freeze is not even a big threat here.
Yeah, it's pretty much the Devolving Missiles that he needs to try and avoid. And that is exactly what Glory has access to. Needs to try and hit the Lake Thresher.
Oh, that's
and
huge.
It's a perfect outcome. Perfect.
Font of Power lets him discover another thing to cheapen the Mana Giant with. But just going for a bit more damage onto this board. It's up as much as possible.
Yeah, works out really clean.
The Giant is just a little bit short of playable this turn.
Yeah, he's going to need to hit like a Ray of Frost
or
a Magic Trick potentially off of the Cram session if he wants to be able to play it on this turn.
Would make all the difference if he could. Is it? It's worth, I think it is, just going for Evocation to give you one shot at playing the Mana Giant. It is green there.
Mirror Image as the last card available, just coming down in time to protect the rest of his board, get the Mana Giant down, and start smashing away at the face for Pyroblast of all cards to hopefully end this one for Glory.
When did that box get there? I didn't even notice. Oh my gosh.
And now, weirdly enough, the che0nsu Tricaster is low-key terrible here for che0nsu.
Yeah. It means he can't play... I guess the fact that he's already played Guardian Animals, the second one, is not really pulling anything out at this point, but...
that's true.
It's just making, for example, the Twilight Runner Blessing of Ancient's turn impossible now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Innovate, while technically neutral, is probably not what you want to go for.
The key thing is that I don't see a way to remove the Sorcerer's Apprentice. That's the problem card here.
Yep.
Time waits for no one.
And so is it just going to be runner pass?
Yeah.
Runner double trade, obviously. Preloading the Living Dragon Breath is interesting here. That means he doesn't value the effect of not being able to freeze something.
What makes something...
Thankfully, I suppose for che0nsu's sake, there is no real way to get a benefit out of the Sorcerer's Apprentice.
Yeah, at the moment.
Other than, of course, it just being a 3-2 and able to clear up this board pretty nicely.
I struggle to say what the Blessing buff was all about. I don't feel like it made his board any more resilient towards trades. Whereas maybe getting down a stealth minion could have given him, say, a shot at getting Kael'thas this turn.
Yeah, I agree. It was definitely not an easy situation to be in at all.
What to do?
Really rough for che0nsu now. Best he can do is, what, Fog Beam, Hero Power? That sounds awful.
I mean, just double guy, right? Play out both your beasts to try and survive and squishy up the board a little bit.
Hmm.
Yeah, you take the mind games here.
Got it right.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of those things where it's worth talking about that you can deliberately choose the better minion in order to trick your opponent, which would have
Yeah.
been pretty cool to see from Glory, but yeah, the expected outcome in the end.
We shall end this.
I don't know if I've ever picked the better minion to be the secret one. And now everybody who faces me on ladder will know it.
I mean, my counter would be imagine playing Jandis in Tempo Mage. Doesn't quite warrant a spot, in my opinion.
I mean, it worked out super well in Glory's first game with the mage, where he went for that curved game plan. But for this situation now, the fireball is definitely jumping out at me because he's able to send 10 face this turn.
Yeah.
And he has Pyroblast, so instead of going for consist clears, he could just be saying, if I'm not dead in 2 turns, then I win.
I mean, he's seen the crystal powers as well, right?
Yeah.
So he doesn't even need to be so afraid of healing coming down. Already seen an overflow as well, so I like it. I think the idea of just getting as much damage as possible is the likely win condition.
Bunch of ramp for che0nsu.
You just have to play the overflow, right?
Yeah, I think he's looking for a way to deal with this 4-2 and then trade off the mana giant before he overflows, because
Okay.
doesn't work
Yeah,
out.
sure.
So if he picks up crystal power exactly from the, wait,
He's
or
played
Bog
them
Beam?
both though, right?
Fog beam then?
Yeah.
Not it.
Well, not that.
Well, now you just have to bite the bullet, I think.
He's not playing the overflow
Oh,
here.
he can
I
still
mean,
play it. Lightning Bloom, Innervate.
sure. I mean, heals up the giant then, so I guess he was just never planning on playing it because he just would never be able to clear up the board then.
I think he was just begging for Bog Beam at that point.
Yeah.
Best case scenario for him, but it's not there. That's gonna be game.
It is
11 on the
indeed,
board.
finally, the mage is able to get over the finish line. It's been a bit of a long road to get there, having lost the both of its previous games so far. But now, finally, Glory getting the win on the table and taking us to Game 5, Gia, in our winner's bracket match.
Super intense, and I absolutely love to see it. Glory, undisputed winner of last season. Just an incredible stomp across all of the regions. I don't know if anybody had as dominant a performance as Glory, but now che0nsu coming in very, very strong, putting in so much work, always getting those consistent ladder finishes, and showing, I think, one of the best knowledges of how to build a lineup for this first week. It's now coming down to who's going to make it to Sunday.
Yeah, and the last 2 archetypes that we have left for these players is, of course, going to be the Druid for che0nsu and the Druid on the other side for Glory. And I think as a nice change of pace here, Gia, we got pretty used in the previous meta to talking about how crazy, how nonsense some of the Druid mirrors can be. And I think even though there's going to be some shenanigans for sure, there's a little bit more agency for the players in terms of deciding who can win.
Yeah, there is a little bit more nuance now. I think in a couple of weeks, players will have this down pat. But now that it's just the first week of GM, probably the first competitive series that these players are even going through in this meta, you can still trip up on things like, should I position for Lake Thresher, correct and stealth my minions? I think being patient with the stealth Twilight Runners is a huge part of this matchup. But also, there are these situations where one person can get to the ramp and get to the big che0nsu, and the other doesn't. So in that vein, it still has some similarities to the old Glowflies.
And so we talk about the big che0nsu. There's a few things I know about Druid. You're keeping the ramp, obviously, and you're keeping the Guardian Animals as the best cards in your deck. Holding on to the che0nsu here for Glory, is that a little bit too optimistic, or do you like just going for the best possible outcome right from the mulligan?
And I think it is so early to say. And right at the end of last meta, we were still talking about whether you're supposed to keep removal, so let alone something like che0nsu. But personally, when I've been playing this deck, I don't hold on to che0nsu unless ramp is already available. Because the way I see it, Overgrowth unlocks not just che0nsu, but Guardian Animal. So that card is essential to even make the other 2 good enough.
And Gloria thinking, that's a Speaker Gidra on the board. What happened when that survived last game? And the answer was, of course, Overgrowth was able to buff it, which is going to be happening yet again, unless Glory wants to go Bloom Bog Beam, which, yeah, you're not doing that in the matchup.
That is very miserable, especially since he kept the che0nsu to kind of make this available. But that is just 10 damage, shipped to the face. Gonna happen again next turn. I guess this is a new Glowfly.
Yeah, Gidra is the new Glowfly coming to a streaming service near you.
Oh my...
That is a
che0nsu,
top deck as well.
Can you stop this man?
Oh! Alright, let's bonk him for another 10 here.
I'm already thinking, what are Glory's outs at this point? If he top decks his own guardian animals, he can bloom che0nsu,
Yeah.
bait animals, but even then, does he get through to the Gidra?
I like the positioning as well here from che0nsu, because unless his teacher's pet summons a beast with taunt, it is unlikely that a Lake Thresher from Glory's guardian animals will be able to effectively clean up the entire board.
It's just not getting there. Thresher is in hand, Glory only runs one, so even if he had picked up the guardian animals, you wouldn't have had an answer. Best you can do is set up a taunt, but between that Gidra sticking and the other two minions, I don't know how this gets there.
I mean, he's
Praying
hoping
for
for
removal.
a miracle here.
Praying for like a Starfall to remove that, I suppose.
Yeah.
Time waits for no one.
That is just game. Oh my god. che0nsu
It's
is unstoppable!
You cannot stop this man. He has had a dominant streak over ladder over the past few weeks, over the past few months, I should say, last metagame and this one as well. And now, relieved as he clearly is, he takes down the reigning champion of Asia-Pacific in a very, very close 5-game series, consolidating and guaranteeing his spot in Sunday in the semi-finals. Already, I think he can be holding his head high as a real contender for our player that's going through to the World Championships later this year.
Definitely. I have to say, of course, all of these players put in a lot of prep work, I'm sure, but I think che0nsu has been the most visible with it, and it's really, really paying off for him here. The 2 control decks, I think, were some did not expect to see brought in this meta, but then again, what can you really expect when the meta isn't settled at all? It could be that che0nsu is playing at his peak when he has kind of that liberty to play around, and before the meta is settled, come up with the decks that are one step ahead of everyone else. And that is something that we saw from Glory last season. So now I wonder if there's a chance to pass the torch. But for Glory, he's not out of it just yet, dropping down to the lower bracket to face the winner between Surrender and Flurry.
That is exactly right. That's going to be our first match up now. It's obviously 2 of the premier South Korean players. I think for the longest time, it's pretty clearly been that Surrender is the top Korean